Hello, I'm Advait and my partner is Kian. Today, we will be presenting Japan's history. The period of the Tokugawa shoguns was from 1600 to 1868. There was a feudal political order with economic and social change occurring gradually. This period saw growing urbanization, the spread of popular education, and the rise of the merchant class. Near the beginning of this era, there were about 300 Christians in Japan. After brutal repression, they were forced underground and Confucianism became the dominant religion. It was conservative and emphasized loyalty and duty. After the Seclusion Act was enacted in 1636, Japan was nearly cut off from the West for the next 200 years. They maintained close ties with Korea and China to keep traditional East Asian political values. There was also the expansion of the commerce and manufacturing industries in addition to agriculture. This led to the growth of cities such as Edo, present-day Tokyo, that catered towards merchants, samurais, and townspeople, rather than the nobles and daimyo, who were the traditional patrons. Two anti-Tokugawa clans, the Choshu and Satsuma, overthrew the shoguns. They overthrew the shoguns because of a strong resentment from peasants, who made up 80% of the population. They named a 14-year-old as their next emperor and created the Meiji Constitution in 1889. The peace and stability of the previous period fostered the rapid industrialization of Japan. The Constitution created a parliament consisting of a lower and an upper house. The lower house representatives were elected by the people, while the prime minister and cabinet members were appointed by the emperor. The feudal system was abolished and the country opened itself to trade with Western countries. This also influenced them to build up their military, which eventually helped propel them to the world stage during World War I. Additionally, many Western countries wanted to trade with Eastern countries like Japan, so they forced them to open their ports to trade, which the Japanese did not like. Japan proposed to Britain that it would enter the war if it could take Germany's Pacific territories. Britain approved their request on the 7th of August, 1914. The Japanese faced little resistance as they took over the Pacific West. During 1915 and 1916, Japan tried to take over more of China. They presented them with the 21 demands. If these 21 demands were met, China would essentially be a protectorate. These demands helped Japan's economy boom because they exploited China's raw materials and labor. This would help to keep expanding their empire as World War I continued on. After World War I, Japan began to mold into a democracy. Members of the parliament began to give up their powers as other political parties developed. Most men gained their rights to vote, while women didn't gain suffrage until 2 decades later. The economy was flourishing until the Great Depression came. Japan's economy was dependent on trade. The Showa financial crisis of 1927 was, quote, the consequence of persistent financial instability because of the incomplete restructuring in the business sector and postponements in the disposal of bad loans by financial institutions. The Showa Depression was caused by the Great Depression, a worldwide economic collapse, resulting in many jobs being lost. In the decade leading up to the Second World War, Japan became increasingly militaristic and was supported by the public in Japan. Business leaders and politicians were killed if they did not support it. As a result of the Great Depression, Japan invaded China to take over Manchuria, a province. But in 1939, World War II broke out. Japan stopped fighting China to join the Axis powers.
Japan joined World War II on September 27, 1940. There are many things that Japan had done during the war that people still talk about to this day. A couple of the things are that they invaded their surrounding neighbors, they joined the Axis alliance, and they attacked Pearl Harbor. Japan had fought many battles during the war, and for a majority of them, they came out on top. One of the biggest battles that Japan had fought was the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was on December 7th, 1941. This was so famous because Japan launched a surprise attack on the US, which they bombed the naval base in Hawaii. This was devastating as it left many dead and many more injured. Japan had joined the war for many different reasons, but for the primary reason, they wanted to conquer the world. Going into war, this did not come without cost, though. At the end, Japan had lost over 2.5 million lives. They also had many of their buildings and cities destroyed. Two of the biggest cities at the time, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were both destroyed by an atomic bomb that was dropped by the US. After the war, many soldiers and leaders faced many consequences. Tojo, which was the leader of Japan, and, and his soldiers faced many different war crimes, including murder. World War II, Japan and the US began to have an agreement, and because of that, going into the Cold War, Japan and the US were allies. This was amazing for Japan because after the devastating wars fought in World War II, their economy was terrible. Because of this, the US was able to help rebuild their economy into a stronger and have a better foundation. After World War II, Japan became free from capitalism. They did this by signing in a constitution on 1947. This was able to create their government into a democracy which gave freedom to all people. And has been doing amazing so far with their economy, where they have been ranked the third best economy by GDP in the world as of 2020. Japan has still maintained their democracy status after signing their constitution after World War II. Currently, Japan has not been fighting any wars with anyone. And recently, Japan has been having high spikes of COVID 19. This can cause many problems because if not been taken the precautions, COVID 19 can spread even more, which will cause a shutdown throughout the country. After COVID 19 is over, I highly suggest visiting Japan because it has many beautiful sights to see, and overall, it is just an amazing place to stay. Thank you.